Welcome to the Early Years Together, the podcast dedicated to the magic, challenge and curiosity of early years education. I'm Dr. Jacqueline Young.
And I'm Deborah Brown. In each episode, we explore what really matters in those foundational years when brains are growing rapidly, identities are forming, and every small interaction can spark a lifetime of learning.
Together we'll dive into the practices, research and real stories that shape high-quality early childhood experiences. This series concentrates on language development and supporting talk, discussing the everyday moments that make a big difference to our youngest children.
So whether you're an educator, a student, a parent, or simply someone who cares deeply about children's early learning, you're in the right place. Let's explore together how we can nurture joyful, meaningful learning right from the very start.
If you enjoy today's conversation, we'd love for you to subscribe, share the podcast and leave us a review so more people can join in. So let's get started. What's our topic for discussion today, Deborah?
Well, today's topic is why being an active listener is important. The term active listening actually came from psychologists Carl Rogers and Richard Farson in the 1950s. And the principles of active listening have been adopted well beyond the original idea of using active listening as a tool for therapy. So when we can then translate and think of active listening, we can think of those adult-child interactions and we can consider it from the lens of the adult or the child.
Yeah, so it's important to think why this is so important. So before children can talk, they're listening, aren't they? And hearing is one of the earliest senses that an adult caregiver can stimulate. So according to Jardri et al. 2012, a fetus can hear sounds from the age of around 33 weeks, and that includes their mother's voice. And then afterwards, once the baby's born, early learning really happens when babies tune into the voices, rhythms and patterns around them.
The Early Years Foundation Stage Framework is the legal requirement for early years education for children aged birth to 5 in the UK. And so within that framework, communication and language is one of the 3 prime areas of learning and development. So that means it's one of the aspects of learning that's deemed most important for young children. On the Help for Early Years Providers website, which we've linked in the notes for this episode, there is some information on why listening and understanding is important. Their site suggests that listening is different to, simply hearing. It means interpreting different sounds whilst then beginning to understand social interactions. Whereas understanding means the processing of what's being communicated, and that really begins with simple ideas and vocabulary.
So listening isn't passive. It involves an active construction of meaning, and that then lays the groundwork for other forms of communication as well as thinking skills and social understanding. And before we can teach children how to be active listeners, we need to do it ourselves and model it for others. When we're being active and attentive listeners, we need to do certain things. So I think maybe that's what we need to have a chat about next, Deborah.
Yeah, I think it's really reflecting on that idea of being fully present, and actually giving children your full attention. So they really pick up on those non-verbal cues that you may kind of project.
And I think sometimes we get so caught up, don't we, in thinking about what we're going to say next and not really thinking through what the child is saying. So it's really focusing on them rather than our own internal thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. And then also paraphrasing what they have said. So, making it clear that you have heard what they've said to them. So maybe kind of narrating your listening.
What does that mean, Deborah? Do you want to give an example?
Yeah, so saying things such as, I'm listening carefully to what you're telling me, or let's listen to each other so that everyone gets a turn. That then really means that children learn what listening looks, but then also feels like. What else could we do?
I think it's important to think about questioning as well, using open, curious questions. And obviously in a previous episode, we've looked at open questions. Also avoiding interruptions. So thinking about the space, where is this happening? Getting down to their level, making that eye contact with the child's really important.
Yeah, and those kind of, the eye contact, that non-verbal cue, really then actually being explicit and validating a child's feelings and sort of showing an understanding of experiences. I can really see why that was important to you. I think, that's just some extra things that we can do.
I think that sort of feelings, keying into feelings, means actually looking at their body language, doesn't it, Deborah? And facial expressions, and not just what they're saying, but using their whole system of communication. What other signals are they giving you about how they're feeling?
Yeah, and I think as well, you need to listen with intention, and really show that actually we are there to understand. Sometimes we can't always fix things. Actually, that understanding of what's going on is just enough. I think as well, we have to remember to wait for responses. And to be patient, that there is a processing time for children.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to just want to step in and fix things, and just sometimes we can't, and we need to understand that sometimes being present is enough.
So we've been talking about strategies that we can use when we're thinking about being an active listener and really tuning into children. But there is actually some research from the Education Endowment Foundation, or the EEF. And we will link this in the notes for today's show, so you can also look at this if you're interested. That talks about the ShREC approach, which is a mnemonic as a way of remembering practical strategies that practitioners can use to encourage us to become more responsive and attuned to children. So first off, we need to think about sharing attention, which essentially means tuning in and showing that genuine interest in what the young child is focused on. And by doing that, it really lets them know that you value and want to then spend time with them. So it's a great and very powerful way to establish that connection.
Yeah, and sharing attention, I think we've already covered, really. It means getting down to the child's level, really engaging with whatever it is that they're doing. So joining in with the child's play can often be really motivational and support them to make that connection to communicate with you. So it really means seeing what the child is doing and hearing what the child is saying.
Yeah, so, being an active listener is that key part of a practitioner's role. Once we've seen and heard a child, we need to respond, but that response needs to be appropriate and based on that knowledge that you have of the child as an individual. Those adaptive, attuned responses should really be sensitive, supportive, and also stimulating. So it's that way of communicating, and that can be through verbal and also non-verbal communication.
So non-verbal responses might include eye contact, looking expectantly, nodding, smiling, or displaying other emotions on your face. And verbal responses, they might include narrating what the child is doing or commenting on what they can hear, see and feel, validating the child's feelings so that they feel heard.
Yeah, and I think that articulation of the links between what they're showing an interest in or their activity and their previous learning experiences is a really, really key tool to use. In the early years, the aim is for children to understand really how to listen carefully, but then also why listening is important. So how do we encourage a child to be an active listener beyond modelling it ourselves?
Again, there are several things we can do, I think. And, the first thing is really going back to that old nugget open-ended questions, which again, I know that we've covered in episode 4 of this series. So we direct people to go back to have a look at that. But it's really just thinking about the kind of questions that we ask in order to get the most engagement from the child that we're talking to.
Those kind of things, I wonder why. Well, that awe and wonder is really key. But when we have those questions that we ask of children, we also need to remember to give children that thinking time as well. So a pause after the question, the child needs time to process and then actively then engage with you in responding to questions as well.
And that means, doesn't it, Deborah, sort of keeping those interactions, and particularly if those interactions are instructions in any way, short and simple. So it's avoiding those compound instructions where we give 10 instructions all at once and then the child doesn't know what they're doing or what they're being asked to do.
And they often just remember the last thing you've said. So, it's that thing of really remembering what's important in what I'm asking for that child. And again, to sort of try and stop some kind of confusion, actually trying to reduce background noise where possible. Children can struggle to listen when there's background noise occurring.
So it's thinking about, where in the setting or where in the home are you doing these kind of listening activities. It's no point doing it next to an open window with diggers outside or next to some music playing. If you want the child to concentrate and really give you their full attention, then you need to minimise cognitive load, strip out all the things that might make them distracted.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, those playful opportunities to encourage listening skills, those games like Simon Says, or actually if there are diggers outside, let's go and listen to those diggers, making it fun, engaging, and those sort of environmental sound walks can be a great way to kind of get children to listen for longer periods of time than just if they're talking to you. So.
Yeah, and I think thinking about that, the length of time that we expect children to do it, at the age of 5, we don't, or even younger, we don't expect children to sit for really long periods of time. So all these games and activities, they just need to be short and snappy.
So, another thing we can do is just make sure that we use visual cues to support what's being said. So if you're in a setting, that might be communication in print cards. It might be making sure that there are pictures of topics or things that you're talking about. Even in the home, that can just be real objects. So making sure that children know that the object you're talking about is called what it is.
And I think it's also important to think about what kind of praise you're using. So praising the behaviours and being specific. So not just saying things like good listening, but pointing out specific habits like, well done, you looked at me when I spoke to you, or well done, you waited to take a turn when it was your turn to speak.
Yeah, and you can also, to find out, have children been listening and understanding what's been said. So story time is a great time to encourage that comprehension and to kind of really guess what's going on. So questions like, can you guess what's going to happen? Can you tell me what's happened so far? Those are things that you could ask.
And being consistent in your language is another good tip. So using phrases, particularly if you're working in a nursery setting, that cue the children in to the fact that listening is expected. So things like, put your listening ears on, or eyes on me, as a signal to what's being expected.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Praise that effort, not the outcome.
Yeah, so things like, you've tried really hard, just to emphasise that it was the effort that they've put into the listening that really matters.
So as we now come to the end of our chat today, I think we can have a pause and just to reflect on the main points that we talked about and just give some kind of ideas of things that you could take away. One of the main things is that active listening really is an important skill for learning, and outcomes for listening really do form a part of that early years foundation stage framework in the UK. But also I think we need to start with ourselves. So we really need to encourage children to be active listeners. And in order to do that, we have to be active listeners ourselves.
And that really does bring us to the end of today's episode of the Early Years Together. Whether you're listening on your commute or while tidying up after a wonderfully messy morning of play, thank you for choosing to spend this time with us.
Yeah, supporting the learning of young children is complex and deeply human work. So, every interaction, every question that we pose, every moment that we slow down to notice a child's thinking, it really does all matter. And, all those things really do add up.
So if today's conversation sparked an idea or challenged your thinking in some way, we'd love for you to share our podcast with a friend or colleague. These ideas grow stronger when we explore them together. Wishing you a really great week until we see you next time. I'm Dr. Jacqueline Young.
And I'm Deborah Brown. So thank you for listening, and we really do look forward to having you with us again next week.